Hey there, listeners, and welcome back to Dragon's Demize, the podcast about what happens on, around, and behind the tabletop. I'm your co-host, Greg B. Joining me is Jacob.
Hello.
And today, we're going to be reviewing Evolution Climate. This is sort of a follow-up to our Evolution Flight episode, which was released quite a while ago now.
Yeah, it's been a while.
That's vintage. All right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're going to be reviewing that. But first, let's have some tales from the tabletop.
Ooh.
Spooky, except not really. Yeah.
But, so you've been doing some pretty damn good RPGing recently.
I have been very busy with tabletop RPGs. So that campaign that I've been running for my coworker and our friends, I wrapped it up. You know, it was taking a lot out of me. I wasn't able to put the attention into it that I felt it deserved, that they deserved. But we did have a really good final session. The players got to investigate a sort of smuggling operation. The Thieves Guild was operating out of the bottom of a waxworks.
Oh.
And I kind of presented them with a couple of different opportunities. They could go in stealthily, sneak in at night. They could go in, kick in the door, just mess everything up. But actually, I was really proud of them. They were really creative. What they decided to do was take advantage of the mage, the sort of NPC mage, who I had accompanying them, to cast disguises on each of them, which they utilized to sort of go in, scout the place out, and then the druid shapeshifted into a weasel.
Nice.
And snuck down into the basement and waited there overnight. And I gave them sort of plot items early on in the quest that allowed them to communicate telepathically as long as they were within 1 mile of each other.
Okay. All right.
So he was able to communicate to the rest of them that, hey, it's going down. Around
go.
Yeah, around the time that it was happening. So they rolled in and took out a pair of thugs and a spy and a bandit captain. Were the NPCs from the bestiary that I threw at them, and they dealt with it just fine. There were bears, there were flaming spheres. The monk was just a monster.
I mean, monks are.
Yeah, so I think they had a lot of fun with it, and they were super sad that the campaign was drawing to a close. But I definitely let them know I would absolutely love to return to that. I just, I've got a lot going on right now between the podcast and between a whole bunch of everything else and work and all that. So I took a step back from it, but it was a great sort of last session, last hurrah.
Those are always fun. I mean, in general, it's always sad when you have a campaign end, but at least when you end on a last hurrah, that's great. Whereas most of the campaigns that I've had end have always just been oh wait, when was the last time we met? Oh, 3 years ago.
Right. Yeah, it just kind of peters out.
Yeah, it peters out. You don't really have much of a conclusion.
Yeah.
There isn't really that much going on. I mean, that happened with my last campaign that I played in. And so it's just I would much rather have that big bang, just all right, let's go. Let's destroy something and
definitely
make it epic and then finish off the campaign.
Yep. So someday in the future, you might hear me refer back to that. But for now, taking a step away from that. I also played in my Emerald Spire campaign that's being run by a friend of mine from Tulsa. Yeah. We just finished level 6, something like that. Maybe, I think we finished level 5. We're on level 6.
Okay.
And it's a lot of fun. It's very goofy. All of us are very niche characters. I'm an Oread monk, so lots of hitting things, lots of monkey goodness. And that's always fun to play in. And then I also got to play the continuing adventures of Delta Green.
Yep.
Or misadventures, I suppose I should say.
Oh, yeah. So I was hearing about this from the GM. Apparently, this last session involved Nazis.
It did, yeah. So one of the things that's very important in sort of the Delta Green Cthulhu modern setting is an organization called Karatechia, which was during World War II the super science mysticism cultishness of the Nazi regime. They were actual they might have been official military, they might have been paramilitary, but they were officially authorized to look into the occult. And so all of the the Raiders of the Lost Ark Nazis who are investigating that type of stuff, that's Karatechia. And in Delta Green as a setting, that organization has persisted, and they've discovered secrets of things like immortality and time travel and all this bullshit. We actually arranged a sit down with them because we had previously been burned. Like our entire organization had been just eviscerated, and we were looking for information about who had done it.
Yeah.
So we grit our teeth and had a sit down with Karotekia, in which we didn't really learn anything super useful, and we ended up walking away and finding the information we wanted elsewhere. But it was certainly interesting. It took all of my willpower not to punch certain people in the face. My character.
Okay. I was gonna say, was it players at the table?
No. It was my character. There was a certain neo-Nazi figure ripped straight from the headlines made an appearance. And yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah. All right. I remember the GM was saying that he was going to make this a very provocative session for you guys.
Yeah. Yep.
That happened?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm very glad we did not end up working with them. I am kind of sad that we didn't end up just like murking them, but
Yeah.
you win some, you lose some.
Exactly.
You have had not an opportunity to play, but an opportunity to run.
Yes.
Starfinder now, what, 2 weeks ago?
Something along those lines. It was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, depending on exactly the date of the airing of this podcast.
Right.
Yeah, so I got to run pretty much the second session. We had 3 returning characters. We had your character, Greg. We had Indigo Stars. And we had Will's character, who is the smuggler. We were joined by my friend Caitlin, who was playing a little Yosoki mechanic.
Yep.
So, little Ratman mechanic kind of thing. And I thought that it went well. I
totally agree.
Yeah, you guys did a really good job with the role-playing of it and everything like that.
Yeah.
You even forwarded the plot more than I would have expected.
Yeah, well, it was interesting.
Yeah.
I know the Hesper that you threw at us, I was definitely not expecting that to turn into like, hey, we'll take you to the sun.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like maybe we'll bring it on the ship. I kind of saw that coming.
Yeah.
But like in terms of advancing the plot that much, and my character's plot in particular of going to the cities in the sun, the burning archipelago, that was totally out of left field.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, like that's good. Like I think that was really good initiative on some people's parts.
Yeah.
And in general, like the role playing, like, first of all, I'm always internally laughing at some people's caution. So, like, I think Caitlin in particular, she's been burned by DMs in the past.
Yeah,
like,
I believe it.
And so whenever there's anything going on, it's like she will make sure to have at least 2 like escape routes and like not touch anything until like it's completely certain.
Which sort of works with the character as well.
Oh, it does for sure. No, like it's especially in this case with the Yosoki little mechanic dude. Yeah, makes total sense. But it's just me sitting behind the screen being like, you can just pull the lever and talk to him. But all right,
Yeah,
let's go for
gotta be over by the button.
Yeah, like have the 2 people out by the button. Ready the thing. Turn off the jammer. Okay, now let's talk. But yeah, you guys did a great job like convincing him. And I finally had to get. I really wanted to get some combat in. So
yeah, and we finally did.
Yeah,
so that was good. Yeah, all around. I mean, I think it was a great session.
Yeah,
seemed to flow very well from a player perspective. So
yeah, I definitely enjoyed it. I thought that it was it had some interesting plot points. You got to explore a little bit of the underworld of like the satellite and that kind of stuff, and see like how it runs from the bottom up almost, and how a mischievous being that is not really like evil or anything like that just wants to change things for the sake of change.
Yeah.
And it's just like, all right, yeah, I'm going to literally change like the language that you use into a language that doesn't exist.
This is very unique interaction.
Yeah. So yeah, it was fun to GM, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed playing.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, there you have it. That's a look at some of the tales from our tabletops. Here, Smarro Nom Nom, here, Smarro Nom Nom, feeding time. Why don't you go take a look at that little creature over there? It looks tasty.
But you can't eat my Duggodillo. It's got hard shell.
Darn, thwarted again. And oh no, my last Smarro Nom Nom. It's dying of starvation.
Such is the cutthroat world of evolution.
Uh-oh, there's a storm brewing.
Climate is the other part of the name of the game. Yeah, we couldn't really figure out how to work that in there. But Evolution climate is what we're going to be reviewing today. Those of you who have been around for a long time or had the dedication to burn through our archives may remember our review of Evolution and Evolution Flight. This is a standalone, actually. This isn't an expansion. Evolution climate is its own box.
It is,
with some new mechanics, but revolving generally around the same core gameplay.
So the core gameplay of Evolution is pretty much you're creating your species. You can have multiple species, each player can, and you're giving them traits, and you're trying to see who is able to eat the most food amongst all of their species by the end of the game.
Exactly.
So this is all pretty much revolving around the cards that you have in your hand and in your deck. So you will get a certain number of cards at the beginning of your turn. That equals 4 plus the number of species that you have. You then use those cards. They are pretty much all trait cards, unlike Evolution Flight, which added the event cards. This one just has traits. And you pretty much can discard them to gain a new species, to increase body size, increase population, or just play the traits on your creations to, give them a little bit of an edge over the competition.
Yeah, but they're not Franken creatures. This is Evolution at work. This isn't some crazy scientist in his lab.
Yeah. Each one is like going over generations or whatever and all that kind of stuff.
That said, they can be extremely goofy.
As the scientific name Smarananom really shows.
It's something else. Boops.
Yeah.
Right, but so Evolution Climate takes a lot of these same core mechanics and adds one very important new thing to them, which is the climate track.
Yes.
So at the top of the board, which takes the place of the watering hole from the original Evolution, there is a track with a climate that goes from very, very cold to very, very hot with temperate in the middle. And it's divided up into different sections, each of which has different mechanics that it influences. So the hotter you get, the more punishing it becomes for large creatures. So once you reach a certain point on the heat track, basically any creature with a body size of larger than 5 or larger than 3 or eventually larger than 1, if you get high enough, will start to lose population because of the sweltering heat. They, perspire and then they die.
Yeah.
Vice versa, the colder you go, you punish small creatures. They have faster metabolisms. They, give off heat. They can't survive. So, starting with creatures of body size 2 or smaller, 4 or smaller, and then finally 6 or smaller, everybody is just losing tons and tons of population.
During an ice age, everyone is screwed.
Right. We're in the middle of like a global winter.
Yeah.
No one's going to be doing very well. So this new track, not only does it influence, what effective strategies look like, it can also change the amount of food that's in the pile.
Yeah.
Hot climates, they help you up to a point. Plants start to thrive, but eventually, you reach the point of basically desertification, and you're starting to lose food, no matter what the cards say. And then on the other end, during the cold climates, there's just no food. It's just categorically
just like minuses all across the board. Like you're going to the cold climates and the winters, the global winters. Well, all the plants are dying out.
Yeah, it's bad news bears.
Yeah, it's a carnivore's world out there.
Yeah.
Until everybody dies.
until a meteor shows up and kills everyone.
Yeah. So the game has an interesting way of actually changing how the climate functions. So, you have to move it over one way or the other, and the players do have a certain amount of influence over this. This isn't like an action or anything that you take. What it is part of the food cards phase, pretty much. So, as you may remember or know from Evolution, at the beginning of every turn, every player puts down a card that denotes the amount of food that is going to be placed in the watering hole, or on the climate track this time. And now what they've added to the cards are pips that show either a sun or a snowflake, which denote whether or not that card is pretty much pushing the climate into the heat or the cold. And when all of the food cards are revealed during the watering hole step, that's when you count up how many pips are of each type, and whichever one outweighs the other, that is the direction in which the climate is moving. So you could have it all like just fluctuate within the temperate zone if like people just move one way and the other. But if there's a concerted effort, especially like if you see like multiple people being like, all right, we're going to do small creatures and we're going to go into the hot temperatures so that we can kill all the like big guys. Like you could have multiple players actually putting that in to move the climate.
Right. And so it's a very resistant change mechanic, but it is controllable by the players to a certain extent.
Exactly.
Sort of the final mechanic that accompanies the climate track are special climate cards.
Yeah.
So there are 2 decks, one for hot and one for cold. Mm-hmm. And when you flip them over, each of them has a temperature band that it occupies. So that says this card is triggered when the temperature reaches cold, or the temperature reaches cool, or warm, or what have you. And then it has an effect. And several of these are simply replacements for what would otherwise be the climate effect. If you have a cold snap in the middle of otherwise hot weather, for example, you can punish small creatures when they didn't expect to. So that can kind of keep you on your toes. Others of them are, shall we say, more...
apocalyptic.
Yeah. Meteors, volcanic eruptions, glacial thaws, things that are going to really have a big impact on the game. My personal favorite, is Meteor.
Yeah.
Because it says, don't put any food into the watering hole this turn or for the rest of the game. It's basically, you are a carnivore or you die. Or you're probably a carnivore and then you die.
Quite possibly.
It's definitely a mass extinction situation with the meteors. But so where the climate track sort of represents gradual, sustained change over time, the climate event cards can really have an outsized effect once on the gameplay.
Yeah. And also just to note, these climate event cards, when you're playing with them, and you don't have to, it is something that is a variant in the rules.
True.
We like to play with them when we play Evolution Climate.
They're fun.
But you get to see one cold and one hot out on the board at all times. So you know what is coming when you get to a certain point. It's not like, oh, you cross over this threshold, now draw a card, and it's a complete surprise.
Right, that's very true.
So you do get to actually see what's coming. You get to see and plan for that, which, you can use to your advantage, and you can also read incorrectly, and then you get really screwed by it. I'm talking from personal experience.
Yeah, that was a bad game.
So in general, they are very interesting. And in general, they pretty much just show, these are the creatures that are affected. This is how many population they lose. And this is how food is affected by this card.
Yeah.
Those are the major elements. And that's the new mechanics that have been added in Evolution Climate. There have been some interesting changes to the actual cards themselves.
Right.
So the cards are mostly the same. They have the same artwork, a lot of it from the old ones, but they also added new cards. So things like defensive frills, which are both a cooling mechanism and a defensive mechanism. As well as heavy fur, which is a very, very good coping mechanism for cold. But as soon as you get into the hot temperatures, you're actually going to get a detriment from that. You're going to start losing population the longer you keep that on your creature.
And so these cards are really interesting because they give you a way sort of around the strategy. If someone pushes you into a hot zone that you weren't expecting and you're like, oh crap, my creature's really big, I'm going to lose population. These cards just say, ignore X population loss due to heat or Y population loss due to cold. So they kind of offer you a safety valve if you can get them, as well as many of the older cards have been updated.
Yeah.
So things like defensive herding, burrowing, things that, reasonably, if you're clustered together, you're going to have body heat and you're going to be protected against cold. If you're underground, you're going to be protected against heat. All these things make sense and they've been updated accordingly to sort of go along with the new climate tracker. And I think it's a very effective system.
I definitely think so. I think it's the additions and the balance changes that they have made on the cards are definitely very worth it. So the game itself, I think, this is an incremental change. It's interesting because you don't get to see these very often in board games.
It's true.
We talked about this, I think, with Mystic Veil, that the expansions have almost done the incremental change for the game. Some things are weak, so they added things in the expansion that made a certain strategy stronger and just tried to balance it out. But most games don't really have that ability.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting to see that instead of just doing a evolution like second edition, they decided to add up this other mechanic and just change the game and make those other tweaks that do make the game a lot better and run a lot smoother.
Yeah.
And they really did do a pretty good job, in my opinion. The game feel is definitely a lot less single strategy oriented. Because back in evolution, you pretty much want to be a long-necked, large herbivore.
Yeah.
And if you are that, you live and you win. And that's it. That's just how it works. If you max out body size and population and have like maybe one other defensive trait like defensive herding, nothing can kill you.
Yeah, there are certainly ways around it, but it really puts the onus on carnivores to kind of go above and beyond. It's way easier to make, tons of points, eat tons of food as an herbivore with the right setup, with the right defensive traits. So in terms of how climate affects that dynamic, I think it makes it a lot more dynamic.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes it from what essentially felt like a tug of war.
Yeah.
Where you're trying to say, okay, well, I'm a carnivore. I want to try to, use intelligence to negate your cards, or I want to play climbing to counter your climbing. Really, just a one for one, tit for tat, into something that's much more circular. It's much more, okay, you're going for a large herbivore strategy. I could carnivore, and I probably still will carnivore, but I'm going to supplement that by pushing the temperature up and punish you for making a large body size that I otherwise wouldn't be able to eat. So, that forces player A, the herbivore player, to adapt, which then forces the carnivore. Like, for a game that's called Evolution, you want it to be constantly in flux. And I think the climate tracker does an incredibly good job of affecting that change in a way that feels very integrated into the game. It doesn't feel, forced. It doesn't feel arbitrary. It's very well integrated into the strategy of the game, and I think it works very well.
Yeah, and it actually, I think one of the things that is nice about climate is that if you have someone who is going out ahead and getting just any kind of big creature that's wrecking everyone else, you don't have to build up a whole nother carnivore just to try to kill this thing. Like, it works to just go ahead and increase the temperature. It's another strategy for punishing players that are getting a little bit too far ahead that was not present in Evolution.
Right.
It gives you an option that is not just like trying to build up a whole nother species just to counter it. And it does actually increase a little bit of the player interaction there, where now, the player who doesn't want it to get hot, they would have to really focus on keeping the cards and the traits to put into the center that have the snowflakes to keep the temperature cooling or something like that.
Right.
Or also, you could have a strategy of just like building towards what climate you're pushing to.
Right. And I think because of the way that they implemented it, because of the fact that the way that players impact the climate has been added to the food cards in that selection, to take that mechanic and to sort of graft it onto the food card system that already existed, was already very flexible, very almost unique to Evolution, I think was a great idea. And it makes the food card selection that much more impactful.
Yeah.
Because now, if you're trying to support a large herbivore strategy, it's not enough to just say, okay, I need a card with 8 food on it, instead of a card with negative food on it. Now you have to say, I have to have a card with 8 food on it, and one that I think is going to preserve the climate band where I am most comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. And also, you have to be careful of the different events that are happening, because, you might want to go into the cold, but then you have, a heat wave that kills off some of your population.
Right.
And that makes you vulnerable to a pack hunter or something like that. So it really does have an interesting effect on gameplay in a very positive way, in my opinion.
Yeah, very much so.
That all being said, no game is perfect. And though it has gotten better, I still think one of the problems that I have with Evolution Climate, just as I had in Evolution, is that the carnivore strategy is extremely difficult, if not unviable, pretty much. In my opinion, it's one of those where it's like, yes, you can do it, but where in Evolution, if you look at like an actual food web, you have an apex predator. Here, that's almost impossible to keep.
Yeah, it's true. And I kind of want to push back against that somewhat. I do think that carnivore can be a viable strategy, but I think you've touched exactly on it. And it's that carnivore isn't a viable long-term strategy. You really have to be you have to be able to notice when, things are turning against you, when people have defensive traits that you can no longer counter, or when, the climate is shifting into an area that's untenable. and you have to be willing to sacrifice your carnivore trait and move back into an omnivore strategy.
Yeah, either that or, you might be forced to sacrifice your entire carnivore, or it's a delicate balance because you still have to invest so much in a carnivore to make them even viable.
That's true.
And then after that, for them to only be viable for like 2 turns until until like all the creatures that you have been feeding on now have all the traits that you can't deal with. It's still a very, very frustrating thing where I would almost want it to be either incentivized in a different way or just there to be some kind of better balance between the carnivores and like the omnivores and the plant eaters.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. One of the other things that is, again, muted by some of the changes in climate, but is still present, is luck. If you get the right combination of traits, you can just accelerate way faster than anybody else.
Yep.
And you can accelerate, in fact, so far that they can't catch you. Mm-hmm. There's no way that they can hope to. Now, with climate, that is, again, scaled back somewhat because you do have to continue getting lucky in terms of the climate cards that you get and sort of be able to control and maintain, a climate band where you're comfortable. But it is definitely still present. And if you get lucky enough, especially in the early game, you can really sort of dictate how your opponents can respond, which leads into, I think, our third and final no game is perfect comment. The game isn't terribly fun with only 2 people.
Yeah, with 2 players, it's very difficult, and it's one of those where everything is a zero-sum game. You're playing against one other person, so every action that you do is going to have a reaction from them or anything like that. Carnivore strategy is even more difficult when you only have the 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 creatures that your opponent has to eat other than your own.
Right.
So all this together really does make it's a game that I don't think I would like to play with 2 players. I think at least 3. If you have 3 players, that's already in a good spot. A little bit more than that, even better. I think it goes up to 6 players. And I think that that's where it gets to be the most fun, like in the 4 or 5 player range.
Yeah.
Because you have enough creatures all around, enough diversity, and like the cards are going in, and it can be even harder to move the climate. So like when we played with 2 players, it was pretty easy for one of us to put something that was higher than the other one and move the climate. When you get to more player counts, I think that the climate tends to stay a little bit more stable, especially if you have a variety of strategies. But that's also a blessing and a curse.
Right.
One thing just in passing was a thought of mine. It would be interesting if the food was differentiated between plant food and actual like meat.
Yeah.
Because it's like that almost, if it were worth more, if it were like, plant food is 2 for 1, or even like something else, like plant food is 3 for 1 point and like meat is 2 for 1 or something like that. Because I think doubling the worth is not really good, but just changing it a little bit in that way. And yeah, that would necessitate some different tokens and whatever. But I think that would also help reward the players who stick with the carnivore strategy, because it is so difficult to actually get into. Like it would almost make it more worth it, even if you are in there only for a little bit.
Yeah, it's definitely, it would be very hard to balance, I imagine.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting prospect, and I think would sort of solve some of those issues with, okay, well, being a carnivore is unduly hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So, all things taken together, how do we feel? Review, what do you think?
My thought is, I think I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic, but still give it a play it. I think it's a fun game. I definitely would like to bring it to table every once in a while. It's good, especially in the not too often played like 6-player range. Yeah. It's nice that it has that ability. It's a definite improvement over Evolution Base and Evolution Flight. And I think that if you like those types of games, this is the best version of it.
Agreed. Absolutely.
So if you like those types of games, buy this. But if this is a game that's new to you, that you just like thought, oh, this is a cool looking game. And that's one thing I haven't mentioned. The artwork on this game is absolutely gorgeous.
Oh, it's great. It's
like the style of it is amazing. It's all these multicolored creatures, all these fantastical things, lizards with horns. Like, you got all these really cool things based sort of off of like real world creatures, but a lot of them have something different. And It's colorful, it's fun. The backs of the cards for the Evolution Climate events are really cool because they blend into the actual mat, so it's got like that really cool visual trick over there. And so in general, I think it is definitely worth a play. And this is definitely one that I would say play it before you buy it.
Yeah, agreed.
If you play it and you love it, go for it. If you love Evolution, buy it. If you're not sure, play it first. That would be pretty much how I think.
I'm going to echo a lot of that sentiment. I'm going to go one step up. I am going to say that this is a buy it. Like you said, I think out of all of the Evolution sort of properties, the franchise, this is the strongest. I think, in terms of game balance, in terms of the care that went into the design and making sure that everything worked well together, I think Climate is really, really great. It's, as you mentioned, absolutely gorgeous. It's got really high quality components in there. It plays a really wide range of players. 2 to 6 is very rare to find.
Yeah.
And I think it's just a great game to have on a shelf. Even though games can run long, especially with larger numbers of players, the pace of the game is very quick. Yeah. It never really feels like a game is stalling because, everybody's going and everybody's picking new traits, and then, everybody sort of takes from the watering hole in very quick succession. And it's a very quick, long game.
Yeah. I think the key to that is that you're involved in almost every step, in that, you're watching all the players before you to see what they did. Like, did they increase their body size? Is one of them indicating that they're going to become a carnivore? Is what's going on?
Yeah.
And once you go, you're still watching the players after you. You might not be able to respond immediately, but at least you want to know what the heck is going to happen.
Yeah, there's definitely a high degree of player involvement. So everything taken together, I think Climate's a great game. I'm going to give it a buy it.
There you have it. But before we go, let's look at a few games that are similar. So we have 2 to highlight, and one of them, the first one that I'm going to talk about, is one that you would not expect. And this is Castles of Mad King Ludwig. So you're going from a card-based game to a tile-based game and that kind of stuff. But hear me out. So Castles has a very similar kind of adaptation mechanic, where you have a certain direction that you want to go and build your castle, but you have to very much adapt to how the other players are building theirs, because you have new tiles that are coming out every turn. You have a master builder who is deciding where those go. As the master builder, you have to look at how everyone else is building their tiles and react to that to see, are they going to be willing to pay the money for this, so I have the resources to do something else. And so it's very much that kind of back and forth, circular kind of gameplay like Evolution has. So even though the theme is completely different, I think that the gameplay itself has enough similarities that, weirdly, if you like one, you will probably like the other.
Yeah, I think so. The other game that we want to highlight is Photosynthesis. This one is maybe a little bit closer in theme. In Photosynthesis, you are planting trees and sort of nurturing them, growing them to their greatest heights, and then harvesting them for points. So with Photosynthesis, you do share a lot of strategic elements with Evolution Climate. On the one hand, you've got, sort of this shared pool of resource that you're competing over, whether it's food or sunlight, which is basically plant food. And you very much have to respond to the placement of your opponent's trees. You're constantly looking for ways to outmaneuver them, to block them, to find areas that they haven't blocked yet. And so it's basically a spatial execution of the gameplay that you find in Evolution Climate, where you're responding to new situations that your opponents have set out before you, and also trying to keep in mind your own kind of growth over time and know, okay, when am I going to play into this strategy? When am I just going to cut my losses and change things up? So I think Photosynthesis, definitely a very different feel, but has a lot of the same strategic elements and considerations that you find in Evolution Climate.
There you have it. That's our full review of Evolution Climate. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Dragon's Demise. We hope that you enjoyed it. Don't forget, WashingCon is coming up September 8th and 9th, and tickets are on sale now. Get them early, as prices do go up at the end of May. So the earlier you get them, the better price you get. Also, be sure to check out our live streaming, because we did a lot of it this past week. We had a really cool live stream at Labyrinth Games and Puzzles for International Tabletop Day. We also have a ridiculous video of our unstable draft, which we are doing again. We have a friend who did a cube, and so it was a lot of fun. And this week we are going back to Near and Far. So join us on Wednesday for our stream of that, as well as next week when we have Daniel George and Mac Hillier, who are the designer and the illustrator for Treasure Mountain, coming onto the podcast to talk about their latest game. We hope to see you all there.